Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a topic that's both fascinating and frankly, quite scary, the dark web. You've probably heard about it, that hidden part of the internet often linked with crime. Well, we've collected some truly chilling stories that are reported to be real experiences and crimes originating from the dark web. These aren't your average spooky tales. They touch on the genuine dangers and unsettling events that can happen when anonymity meets criminal intent online. So, grab your headphones, maybe turn down the lights, or perhaps keep them on. Let's get into this clip featuring true dark web scary stories. My name is Alex. It all started with a weird glitch on a dark web forum I frequented called Ephemeral Echoes. It wasn't one of those marketplaces for illicit goods or anything so overtly criminal, at least not on the surface. Ephemeral Echoes was a haven for the curious, the conspiratorial, and the just plain strange. People shared unsettling anecdotes, cryptic theories, and occasionally, what they claimed to be genuine paranormal encounters. I mostly lurked, reading the threads with a mixture of fascination and skepticism, occasionally posting under the handle Nightcrawler7. My own life was ordinary. I worked a dead-end IT support job, fixing other people's forgotten passwords and explaining for the millionth time how to restart their computers. It was monotonous, soul-crushing work that left me craving something more, something that sparked the same sense of intrigue I found on Ephemeral Echoes. The forum was my escape, a digital rabbit hole I could disappear down after a long day of fluorescent lights and polite but ultimately empty interactions. The glitch appeared subtly at first. It was late one Tuesday night, after I'd finished a particularly grueling shift dealing with a company-wide printer malfunction. I was browsed at unexplained phenomena board, idly scrolling through a thread about alleged time slips in old subway stations. Suddenly, the timestamp on the newest post flickered, jumping from a few seconds ago to something impossibly in the future, 3 weeks from that very moment. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I refreshed the page, and the timestamp was back to normal. Weird, I muttered to myself, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee. I continued reading, dismissing it as a temporary server hiccup. But then it happened again. This time, it wasn't just a timestamp. A user named Silent Observer had posted a reply in the subway thread. His avatar, a blurry image of what looked like a distorted human face, remained static, but the text of his post shimmered momentarily, replaced by a string of garbled characters, symbols I didn't recognize. It only lasted for a fraction of a second before resolving back into the original text. Perhaps these events are not slips in time, but rather, bleed-throughs from another reality. I frowned. That was strange, even for Ephemeral Echoes. I tried to highlight the glitch text to copy and paste it into a translator, but as soon as my cursor hovered over it, the distortion vanished. I refreshed the page again, and Silent Observer's post looked perfectly normal, the unsettling flicker completely gone. Over the next few days, the glitches became more frequent and more pronounced. It wasn't just timestamps or random characters anymore. Sometimes, entire sentences and posts would briefly transform into something else, something unsettlingly specific and personal. For instance, in a thread about strange occurrences in national parks, a post by someone named Wanderlust87 detailing an encounter with unusual lights in the sky momentarily flashed with the words, "They know about the tapes, Alex." My blood ran cold. How could it possibly know my real name? My forum handle was Nightcrawler7. I'd never used my real name on ephemeral echoes. Panic started to bubble in my chest. Was I being targeted? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? I checked Wanderlust 87's profile, but there was nothing that indicated they knew me. They were a relatively active user, posting regularly about hiking and nature photography. The glitches weren't isolated to just one thread or one user. They seemed to appear randomly across the forum, sometimes in old posts I'd already read, sometimes in brand new ones. And every so often, my own username, Nightcrawler7, would flicker, replaced by a single word that sent shivers down my spine: witness. I started spending more and more time on the forum, not just reading, but actively watching, waiting for the next anomaly. I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I was witnessing something I shouldn't be, something that was peeling back the layers of the digital world to reveal a hidden, darker truth. One evening, I was in a thread discussing government conspiracies, a topic that always drew a lot of activity on ephemeral echoes. A user with the ironic name TruthSeeker42 posted a lengthy, rambling theory about the FBI monitoring online forums for certain keywords. As I was reading it, a paragraph in the middle of his post glitched, the words dissolving into another set of characters before reforming. This time, I was quick enough to take a screenshot with my phone. The distorted text in the screenshot was a jumbled mess of letters, numbers, and symbols. It looked almost like some kind of code. I spent the next hour trying to decipher it, going through various encryption methods I knew from my IT work, but nothing seemed to fit. Frustrated, I almost gave up, but then I noticed a pattern. Certain characters seemed to be repeated more often than others. Driven by a sudden hunch, I tried a simple substitution cipher, assigning the most frequent character to the letter E, the next most frequent to T, and so on, based on common English letter frequencies. It was a long shot, but as I painstakingly worked through the jumbled text, a few recognizable words started to emerge. Slowly, painstakingly, the message began to take shape. It was fragmented and incomplete, but I could make out phrases like Project Nightingale, Internal Affairs, and, most disturbingly, Alex K. My heart pounded in my chest. They knew my real name. They knew about me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The glitches weren't random. They were targeted. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me through the forum, revealing pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was part of. And the mention of the FBI, it couldn't be a coincidence, given TruthSeeker42's post right before the glitch appeared. I felt a surge of paranoia. Was my computer compromised? Or my online activities being monitored? I immediately disconnected my laptop from the internet, my hands shaking. I looked around my small apartment, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden watcher. I needed to know more. I had to understand what Project Nightingale was and why my name was being mentioned in these cryptic messages. But how? Who could I trust? The forum, once my sanctuary, now felt like a dangerous place, filled with unseen eyes and hidden agendas. Despite my fear, a morbid curiosity was also taking hold. I had stumbled upon something bigger than I could have ever imagined, a secret lurking beneath the surface of the internet. I knew that digging deeper could be dangerous, but the thought of leaving this mystery unsolved was unbearable. I cautiously reconnected my laptop and navigated back to the Ephemeral Echoes forum. The thread where the glitch had occurred was still active, with new posts from Truthseeker42 and other users, completely oblivious to the message I had just deciphered. It was as if the glitch had only been visible to me, a private communication slipped through the cracks of the digital world. I created a new post in the thread, carefully worded to avoid arousing suspicion. Has anyone else noticed any weird text glitches on the forum lately? I typed, my fingers hovering over the send button. I hesitated for a moment, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Once this message was out there would be no turning back. Taking a deep breath, I clicked post. I closed my laptop, the glow of the screen fading, leaving me alone in the darkness with the chilling knowledge that my ordinary life had just taken a very sinister turn. The glitch on the dark web forum wasn't just a technical malfunction, it was the first breadcrumb in a trail that could lead me to a terrifying truth about myself, about the forum, and perhaps about the watchful eyes of the FBI. The response to my post about the weird text glitches on ephemeral echoes was immediate and overwhelmingly negative. Most users dismissed it as paranoia, suggesting I needed to lay off the late-night browse or that my browser was acting up. A few even made sarcastic comments about me finally succumbing to the forum's usual brand of outlandish theories. Another one bites the dust. Someone with the username Doubtful Thomas wrote, "Thought you were one of the more grounded lurkers, Nightcrawler7. Next, you'll be telling us about alien implants." I felt a wave of disappointment. I had hoped someone else had seen something similar, that I wasn't alone in witnessing these strange occurrences. But the dismissal also brought a sliver of relief. If it was just me, maybe I was going crazy. Maybe it was just stress from work and too much time spent in the darker corners of the internet. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps my phone had glitched when I took the screenshot. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, filling in the blanks to create a coherent message out of random noise. But the feeling of dread persisted, a cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on the forum, refreshing pages obsessively, looking for any further anomalies. Nothing happened for a while, and I started to wonder if it had all been in my head. Maybe I had imagined the message, blown a minor technical glitch out of proportion. Then, late one night, it happened again. I was rereading the thread where Truthseeker42 had mentioned the FBI, specifically the part where his post had glitched before. As I scrolled over it, the entire paragraph shimmered, not just a few words this time. The original text vanished, replaced by another string of garbled characters, longer and more complex than the last one. My heart leaped into my throat. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I managed to snap several screenshots as the text flickered, desperately trying to capture the entire distorted message before it resolved back to normal. This time, the deciphering process was much more challenging. The message was longer and contained even more unfamiliar symbols. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, comparing the screenshots, trying different substitution methods, and even looking up obscure historical ciphers online. The process was tedious and frustrating, but the fragments I managed to piece together kept me going. Nightingale, compromised. Tapes, hidden, location. Alex K, watch every move. The pieces were slowly starting to fit together, painting a terrifying picture. Project Nightingale sounded like some kind of operation, and the fact that it was described as compromised suggested something had gone wrong. The mention of tapes and a hidden location hinted at some kind of sensitive or incriminating evidence. And the chilling final fragment, Alex K. Watch every move, confirmed my worst fears. I was being watched. But why? What did I have to do with any of this? I was just a regular guy with a boring job and a penchant for dark web forums. What tapes could they possibly be referring to? A sudden, horrifying thought struck me. Could the tapes be related to my online activities? While I mostly just lurked on ephemeral echoes, I had occasionally posted, sharing my own unsettling thoughts and experiences. Had I said something that triggered this, whatever it was? I frantically started scrolling through my own post history on the forum, rereading everything I had ever written. Most of it was innocuous, comments on other people's stories, occasional attempts at writing my own short horror snippets. But then I remembered one thread, a few months back, where I had shared a particularly disturbing dream I had had. It was vivid and unsettling, involving themes of surveillance and hidden identities. At the time, I had dismissed it as just a nightmare, but now I wasn't so sure. Had I inadvertently stumbled upon something real, something connected to Project Nightingale? The thought was terrifying. Could my own subconscious have somehow tapped into this hidden reality? As I delved deeper into my old posts, I noticed something else strange. Some of my earlier posts, ones I distinctly remembered writing, seemed to have been edited. The content was slightly different, the wording changed in subtle ways. It was as if someone had gone back and subtly altered my digital footprint on the forum. This realization sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I was being watched, and someone was actively manipulating my online history. They were trying to control the narrative, to perhaps make me look like someone else, someone involved in whatever Project Nightingale was. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to find out what was going on, even if it meant putting myself in danger. I decided to try and contact TruthSeeker42, the user whose post had contained the first glitched message mentioning the FBI. He seemed like someone who might have some answers, or at least be willing to listen. I found his profile and sent him a private message. "Hey, I saw your post about the FBI monitoring forums," I wrote, trying to sound casual. "I've noticed some weird stuff happening lately, and I was wondering if you had any more information." I waited anxiously for a reply, refreshing my inbox every few minutes. Hours passed, but there was no response. I checked his profile again. He hadn't been online since posting the original message. A chill ran down my spine. Had something happened to him? Was he silenced? The silence from TruthSeeker42 only amplified my fear. I felt isolated and alone, trapped in a digital labyrinth with unseen forces closing in. I considered going to the police, but the thought seemed ludicrous. How could I explain any of this to them? They would think I was delusional, obsessed with online conspiracy theories. I realized I had to rely on myself. I had to dig deeper into the mystery of Project Nightingale and the tapes. The glitches on the forum were my only lead, my only way of uncovering the truth. I went back to the thread where TruthSeeker42's post had glitched. I scrolled through the comments, looking for any other users who might have mentioned similar things. I spent hours reading, my eyes burning from the screen, but found nothing. It seemed like I was the only one who had noticed the anomalies. Just as I was about to give up for the night, I noticed a new post in the thread. The username was unfamiliar, the watcher knows. The post was short, just a single line of text, "Alex K. The tapes are closer than you think." My blood turned to ice. They knew I was looking. They were taunting me. The message sent a clear signal. I was being watched in the real world too. My online activity was somehow connected to my physical existence, and whoever was behind this knew who I was, where I was. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I jumped up and frantically started checking the windows and doors of my apartment, making sure they were locked. I peered through the blinds, scanning the street outside, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was as if invisible eyes were boring into me, observing my every move. I felt like a character in one of the horror stories I used to read on the forum, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment. It no longer felt safe. Whoever was behind Project Nightingale and the glitches knew who I was. They knew where I lived. I had to get out, to find some answers, to figure out what these tapes were and why they were so important. But where could I go? Who could I trust? The digital world had turned against me, revealing a sinister reality that was now bleeding into my physical life. I was alone, hunted, and the only clues I had were fragmented messages appearing through a glitch on a dark web forum. My ordinary life was gone, replaced by a terrifying mystery that threatened to consume me. Driven by a primal urge to escape, I threw a few essential items into a backpack, my laptop, phone charger, some cash, and a change of clothes. As I moved through my apartment, every creak of the floorboards and rustle outside sounded like a potential threat. The message from the Watcher Knows echoed in my mind. Alex K., the tapes are closer than you think. What tapes? I racked my brain, trying to think of anything I might have recorded or any situation where tapes could be relevant. My work was just IT support. I didn't handle any sensitive data or recordings. My personal life was equally mundane. I occasionally recorded video game sessions for my own amusement, but those were hardly the kind of tapes that would warrant FBI attention or cryptic warnings on a dark web forum. Unless the tapes weren't literal recordings. Could it be a metaphor? A code word for something else? My mind raced, grasping at straws. As I was about to leave, my gaze fell upon an old box tucked away in the back of my closet. It was filled with old journals and notebooks from my teenage years. I hadn't looked at them in years, but a strange intuition pulled me towards them. Could something in my past be connected to all of this? I pulled out a dusty notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through it, I found the usual teenage angst and dreams. But then, tucked between the pages, a folded piece of paper caught my eye. It was a printout from a website I vaguely remembered visiting years ago, a site dedicated to unsolved mysteries and urban legends. The article highlighted a local case from my childhood, the disappearance of a young woman named Sarah Jenkins. The case had never been solved, and over the years, it had faded from public memory. As I reread the article, a chilling detail jumped out at me. According to the report, Sarah had been working on a series of audio recordings for a college project just before she disappeared. These recordings were never found. Could these be the tapes? But what would my connection to them be? I was just a kid when she went missing. I continued searching through the box, my anxiety growing with each passing moment. In another notebook, I found a series of cryptic notes and doodles I had made around the time of Sarah's disappearance. They were childish and fragmented, but one phrase stood out: saw the man with the nightingale. The man with the nightingale? It sounded like something from a bad dream. But the recurring appearance of Nightingale in the forum glitches sent a shiver down my spine. Could it be a key? Suddenly, a memory surfaced, hazy and distant, like a half-forgotten dream. I remembered being a young boy, playing in the woods near my house. I had stumbled upon a secluded clearing and seen a man talking to a woman. The man had a small, ornate birdcage with him, and inside, I thought I remembered seeing a nightingale. The memory was fleeting and unclear, but the image of the man in the birdcage felt strangely significant. Could this have been Sarah Jenkins and the man involved in her disappearance? And had I somehow witnessed something that I had long forgotten? A wave of nausea washed over me. Could Project Nightingale be related to this whole case? And were the tapes Sarah's missing recordings? If so, why would someone be watching me now, all these years later? What did I know? Or what did they think I knew? The message on the forum suddenly took on a whole new meaning. Alex K., the tapes are closer than you think. Closer not just physically, but perhaps also closer to my own buried memories. I grabbed a notebook and a printout about Sarah Jenkins, shoving them into my backpack. I had to leave. Staying here was too dangerous. I felt a desperate need to uncover the truth, not just to protect myself, but also for Sarah, whose fate had remained unknown for so long. I slipped out of my apartment, the silence of the hallway amplifying my paranoia. I made my way down the stairs, my senses on high alert, half expecting to see someone waiting for me. But the building seemed deserted. Once outside, I moved quickly, trying to stay in the shadows. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay in my neighborhood. I decided to head downtown, hoping to blend into the anonymity of the city. As I walked, I pulled out my phone and navigated back to the Ephemeral Echoes forum. The thread where the Watcher Knows had posted was still open. A new message had appeared, posted just moments ago. He remembers the nightingale. My blood ran cold. They knew what I was thinking. They were inside my head. How was this possible? Panic surged through me. I felt like a puppet on strings, my every thought and action anticipated. I knew I was in way over my head. This wasn't just some internet conspiracy theory. This was real, and it was dangerous. I looked around frantically, convinced I was being followed. A black sedan slowly drove past, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. My heart pounded in my chest. Was this them? Were they already on my trail? I ducked into a crowded coffee shop, trying to catch my breath and think clearly. I needed a plan. I couldn't just run aimlessly. I opened my laptop, connecting to the coffee shop's Wi-Fi. I navigated back to Ephemeral Echoes, hoping to find some clue, some way out of this nightmare. The forum seemed normal, the usual mix of strange anecdotes and unsettling theories. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every click and every keystroke was being monitored. Suddenly, my screen flickered. Not a small glitch like before, but a full-screen distortion, the colors twisting and swirling into an incomprehensible mess. A low, static-filled hum filled the air from my laptop speakers. Then, a single word flashed across the screen in stark white letters. Found. My breath hitched. They had found me. It was over. Just as I was about to disconnect my laptop and run, a private message popped up on the screen. The sender was an unfamiliar username, Silent Witness. The message contained a single line of text: "Go to the old library on Elm Street. Room 307. Tonight. Alone." I stared at the message, my mind reeling. Who was Silent Witness? Were they trying to help me, or was this another trap? The message was strangely specific, referencing a place I knew, the abandoned old library downtown. Despite my fear and suspicion, a desperate hope flickered within me. Maybe this was my chance to get some answers, to finally understand what was happening. I closed my laptop, the word found still burned into my memory. I had a location, a time. It was a risk, a huge risk, but I felt like I had no other choice. As darkness fell over the city, I made my way to the old library on Elm Street. The building stood silent and imposing, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. A sense of foreboding washed over me as I approached the entrance. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. The only sound was the echo of my own footsteps in the cavernous space. I found the staircase and slowly made my way to the third floor. The hallway was long and dimly lit, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. I reached room 307, its door slightly ajar. Hesitantly, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small and bare, with a single wooden chair in the center. Sitting in the chair was a figure shrouded in shadow, their face obscured by the darkness. "You came," a voice said, soft and raspy. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The figure slowly raised their head, and a single beam of moonlight filtering through the grimy window illuminated their face. It was Truth Seeker 42. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of confusion. But the glitches. The Watcher knows. Truth Seeker 42 smiled, a thin, unsettling expression. "We all have our methods, Alex. Project Nightingale is much bigger than you can imagine. And the tapes, well, let's just say you hold a piece of the puzzle we've been looking for a long time." He gestured towards a small, antique tape recorder sitting on a nearby table. "It's time you finally remembered what you saw in the woods that day, Alex. The truth has been waiting." As I looked at the tape recorder, a horrifying realization dawned on me. The glitches, the messages, the feeling of being watched, it wasn't just about the FBI. It was something far more intricate, far more personal. And the tapes weren't just recordings, they were memories, my own memories, buried deep within my subconscious, waiting to be unearthed. The real horror was just beginning. They call me Chris. It's a simple enough name, ordinary even. That's what I've always strived for, ordinariness. Blending in. Being the guy you wouldn't look at twice. Ironically, for a while there, I was anything but ordinary. I was notorious, whispered about in hushed tones in the darker corners of the internet, a name that could send a shiver down the spines of even the most hardened digital denizens. Looking back at the transaction, the one that changed everything, that shattered my carefully constructed facade of normalcy, I realize now it was a deadly mistake. A mistake born out of desperation, fueled by a greed I hadn't known I possessed. My life before, well, it was mundane. I worked a dead-end job as a data entry clerk, the kind where the hum of the fluorescent lights was the most exciting thing that happened all day. My evenings were spent in the solitude of my small apartment, scrolling through forums, playing video games, the usual escapism of someone who felt invisible in the real world. I wasn't unhappy exactly, just adrift. Like a small boat bobbing aimlessly on a vast ocean. Then I stumbled upon it. It wasn't intentional. I was researching something innocuous, some obscure historical fact for a forum debate, and one wrong click led me down a rabbit hole I never knew existed. The dark web. It was like stepping into a different reality, a hidden world operating just beneath the surface of the internet I thought I knew. At first, it was just morbid curiosity. I browsed through the forums, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The things people offered, the things they discussed, it was a stark contrast to the sanitized version of the world I usually inhabited. It started small, just whispers in the digital ether. Mentions of rare artifacts, of unique services, of things that could never be found on the clear web. And then, I saw the listing. It was simple, almost cryptic in its description. Unlocking potential. That was all it said. Below it, a price that made my eyes water, followed by a series of encrypted contact methods. My initial reaction was dismissal. Scam, obviously. Some elaborate hoax designed to prey on the gullible. But the thought lingered. Unlocking potential. What did that even mean? My own potential felt firmly locked away, buried under layers of routine and disappointment. The idea, however outlandish, sparked a tiny ember of hope within me. What if it wasn't a scam? What if this was something real? Something that could change things? I spent weeks wrestling with the idea. I told myself it was foolish, dangerous even. The dark web was a place of shadows, of illegal activities, of people who operated outside the bounds of law and morality. Getting involved could have serious consequences. But the lure was strong, a siren song whispering promises of a life beyond my current limitations. My desperation played a big part, I won't lie. I had dreams, ambitions that felt increasingly out of reach. I wanted to be more than just Chris, the data entry guy. I wanted recognition, influence, something that would make my life feel like it mattered. And the more I thought about that cryptic listing, the more I convinced myself that this could be the answer. So, I took the plunge. It started with creating untraceable accounts, routing my connection through multiple VPNs, taking every precaution I could think of to remain anonymous. It felt like something out of a spy movie, a far cry from my usual evenings spent microwaving dinner and watching old sitcoms. Finally, I made contact. It was a slow, painstaking process, a series of encrypted messages exchanged through layers of anonymity. The person on the other end, who went by the handle Silas, was equally cautious. They asked me questions, probing my motivations, trying to gauge my sincerity. I tried to sound confident, to mask the nervous flutter in my stomach as I typed out my responses. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, Silas deemed me worthy. They sent me a list of terms, a digital contract written in cold, precise language. The price was exorbitant, more money than I had ever seen in my life. It would require liquidating almost all of my meager savings, but the description of what I would receive in return, it was intoxicating. The contract spoke of cognitive enhancement, of access to untapped areas of the mind, of abilities that would set me apart from the ordinary. It sounded like something out of science fiction, but the way Silas presented it, with an almost clinical detachment, made it seem plausible. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it was plausible. The transaction itself was complex, involving cryptocurrency and a series of anonymous transfers. Every step was meticulously detailed, designed to leave no trace. It took days to complete, each transfer sending a fresh wave of anxiety through me. What if I was being scammed? What if I was throwing away everything for nothing? But then, finally, the confirmation came. A single, encrypted message from Silas, package dispatched. The waiting was agonizing. I found myself constantly checking my anonymous email, refreshing the tracking information for the package I had arranged to be delivered to a secure, off-site location. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford, my mind racing with anticipation and a growing sense of unease. The package arrived a week later. It was nondescript, a plain brown box with no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst layers of bubble wrap, was a single object. It was small, made of a dark, metallic material, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe in the light. It looked ancient, almost alien. There was no instruction manual, no explanation of how to use it. Just the object itself. I stared at it for hours, turning it over in my hands, trying to decipher its purpose. Doubt began to creep in. Had I been a fool? Was this just some worthless trinket? Then I touched it. It was cold, almost unnaturally so. As my fingers brushed against the carvings, a strange sensation coursed through my body. It started as a tingling in my fingertips, then spread up my arms, reaching my head. It wasn't painful, but it was definitely intense. My vision blurred for a moment, and I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. When the sensation subsided, I felt different. It was subtle at first, a feeling of heightened awareness. The colors around me seemed sharper, the sounds clearer. My thoughts felt faster, more organized. It was like a veil had been lifted from my mind, revealing a clarity I had never experienced before. Over the next few days, the changes became more pronounced. My memory became razor sharp. I could recall details I had long forgotten, learn new information at an astonishing rate. Complex problems that had once stumped me now seemed simple, obvious. My potential, as Silas had promised, was indeed unlocking. I started using my newfound abilities at work. I could process data at lightning speed, identify patterns and inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed before. My productivity skyrocketed. My previously indifferent boss started taking notice, showering me with praise and even hinting at a promotion. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally getting somewhere. But there was a catch. A side effect that Silas had failed to mention. It started with nightmares, vivid and disturbing. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, the images from my dreams still lingering in my mind. They were always different, always terrifying, filled with shadowy figures and unspeakable horrors. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought I was imagining them. Faint, indistinct sounds at the edge of my hearing. But they grew louder, more persistent. Whispers in the dark, just out of sight, saying things I couldn't quite make out but that filled me with a growing sense of dread. And the hunger. It started subtly, a craving for things I had never desired before. Knowledge, power, control. The more my abilities grew, the more insatiable this hunger became. It was like a void opening up inside me, demanding to be filled. Looking back, I can see the warning signs. The subtle changes in my personality, the growing paranoia, the increasing detachment from the few people I knew. But I was too focused on the benefits, too caught up in the thrill of my newfound power to notice the darkness that was slowly consuming me. The transaction with Silas, the purchase of that strange, metallic object, it had unlocked my potential, all right. But it had also unleashed something else. Something dark and dangerous. Something that was about to change my life in ways I could never have imagined. And looking back now, I realized that the price I paid was far, far greater than just the money. It was my sanity, my humanity, and ultimately, my life. The whispers intensified, morphing from indistinct murmurs into clear, chilling voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They spoke my name, not in a friendly way, but with a hungry anticipation. They knew my fears, my insecurities, the darkest corners of my mind, and they used that knowledge against me. Sleep became a battleground, a nightly descent into terrifying landscapes populated by grotesque figures that felt disturbingly real. During the day, the hunger grew. It wasn't a physical hunger, not for food, but a relentless craving for more. More knowledge, more power, more control. The initial euphoria of enhanced intelligence had faded, replaced by an insatiable need that gnawed at me constantly. I found myself drawn to darker aspects of the internet, the hidden forums and illicit marketplaces I had initially only glimpsed. The things I saw there, the depravity and the violence, instead of repelling me, started to intrigue me. My personality began to shift. I became more withdrawn, more irritable. The simple pleasures of my former life held no appeal. My interactions with my colleagues grew strained. They noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the curtness of my responses. Whispers started in the office too, hushed conversations behind cupped hands. Chris isn't himself lately. He looks unwell. I could feel their eyes on me, their judgment, and it fueled my growing paranoia. I started to suspect everyone, to see enemies where there were none. The object, the catalyst for all this, became my constant companion. I kept it hidden, tucked away in a locked box, but I felt its presence even when it wasn't physically near me. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a silent promise of even greater power if only I dared to delve deeper. One night, the whispers became too loud to ignore. They were no longer just at the edge of my hearing. They were inside my head, clear as a bell. They spoke of things I hadn't consciously considered, desires that had been buried deep within my subconscious. They offered me solutions, shortcuts to the power I craved, but the cost they hinted at was vague, unsettling. Driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening to me, I tried to research the object. My enhanced intellect allowed me to sift through vast amounts of information, to connect seemingly disparate threads. I delved into ancient mythology, obscure occult texts, fringe science websites. I looked for anything that might explain the object's origins, its purpose, its effects. I found fragmented references, whispers of artifacts imbued with strange powers, objects that could grant unimaginable abilities but at a terrible price. Legends of entities that dwelled in the shadows, beings that could whisper temptations into the minds of mortals, offering power in exchange for something else. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that I had stumbled upon something truly ancient and dangerous. My initial hope that I could control these newfound abilities, that I could use them for my own benefit without consequence, began to crumble. The whispers were growing stronger, more manipulative. They preyed on my insecurities, amplified my ambitions, twisted my desires into something darker, something more sinister. One of the recurring whispers spoke of Riley Townsend. The name was unfamiliar at first, just another faceless whisper in the growing chorus inside my head. But it kept coming back, more insistent each time. Riley Townsend. You know what happened to Riley Townsend? I didn't. Or at least, I didn't think I did. I tried to ignore the name, to push it out of my mind, but it was like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Finally, I gave in and searched the name online. The results were chilling. Riley Townsend was a young man who had disappeared without a trace a few months prior. He lived in a neighboring town, worked a similar job to my old one. His disappearance had been a local news story for a week or two, then faded into the background, another unsolved case. But as I delved deeper, I found more. Online forums dedicated to missing persons, amateur sleuths piecing together the scant details. Riley had been a loner, like me. He had also been active on some of the same obscure online forums I frequented. And then I found it, a post Riley had made, just days before he vanished. A post asking if anyone had heard of a dark web vendor selling something called cognitive enhancement. He even mentioned the cryptic phrase, unlocking potential. A cold dread washed over me. It couldn't be a coincidence. Riley had found the same listing, made the same purchase. And now he was gone. The whispers intensified, their tone turning accusatory. You know what happened. You know. Suddenly, fragments of a dream I had dismissed as particularly disturbing came flooding back. A shadowy figure, a struggle, a look of terror in someone's eyes. I had seen Riley. Or at least, a distorted version of him in my dream. But how? The implications were horrifying. The object wasn't just enhancing my mind, it was connecting me to something else, something that had taken Riley. The hunger I felt, the whispers I heard, they weren't just side effects, they were part of a larger, darker process. Panic set in. I had to get rid of the object. I had to break free from its influence before it was too late. I tried to destroy it, to smash it, to burn it, but it was impervious to any damage. It remained cold and inert, seemingly mocking my desperate attempts to rid myself of it. I considered going to the police, but what could I tell them? That I bought a mysterious object on the dark web that gave me superpowers and might have something to do with a missing person? They'd think I was insane. I was trapped. Trapped with a dangerous object, haunted by whispers, and increasingly consumed by a hunger I couldn't control. The potential it had unlocked was not my own. It was something ancient and malevolent that had latched onto me, feeding on my desires, twisting me into something I didn't recognize. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of a ritual, of a way to further unlock my potential, to gain even greater power. They showed me images in my mind, dark and disturbing visions of what I could become. And the more desperate I became to escape their influence, the more tempting their offers seemed. I knew, deep down, that giving in to the whispers would be a mistake. That it would lead me down a path of no return. But the fear was overwhelming, the hunger insatiable. I was losing control, my thoughts becoming increasingly clouded, my sense of right and wrong blurring. The line between reality and the nightmare world of the whispers was dissolving. I started seeing things, fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, hearing whispers even when I was awake and alert. I felt like I was being watched, constantly scrutinized by unseen eyes. My carefully constructed life of anonymity was crumbling. The notoriety I had briefly enjoyed in the darker corners of the internet was nothing compared to the fear and paranoia that now consumed me. The deadly mistake I had made in purchasing that object was unraveling my existence, piece by agonizing piece. And I had a sinking feeling that Riley Townsend was just the beginning. The whispers were telling me so. They were telling me what I had to do next. And the thought terrified me more than anything. The whispers became commands. They filled my head, drowning out my own thoughts, pushing me towards an inevitable, horrifying conclusion. Riley wasn't just a cautionary tale, he was a predecessor. The object hadn't just unlocked potential, it had awakened something within me, something that needed to be fed. And the whispers knew what it craved. They showed me visions of power, of transcending my mundane existence, of becoming something more. But the price, oh, the price. It was becoming terrifyingly clear. The hunger I felt wasn't just for knowledge or control anymore. It was a primal urge, a dark necessity that sent shivers down my spine even as it compelled me forward. The whispers directed me to a specific location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a place that reeked of decay and forgotten things, a perfect setting for the ritual they had been hinting at. As I drove there, the metallic object felt heavy in my pocket, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to resonate with the growing darkness inside me. The warehouse was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of dust and mildew. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the concrete floor. The whispers guided me, their voices echoing in my mind, telling me what to do. In the center of the warehouse, amidst the debris and the remnants of a forgotten past, they instructed me to draw a circle. Not with chalk or paint, but with something far more visceral. The hunger twisted in my gut, a sickening realization dawning upon me. The power they promised, the transcendence, it required a sacrifice. I fought back, tried to resist the overwhelming influence of the whispers, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. My own will felt weak, insignificant against the dark force that had taken root within me. The object in my pocket seemed to thrum with anticipation, eager to fulfill its purpose. I can't bring myself to describe the details of what happened next. The memory is a blur of fear, desperation, and a horrifying sense of inevitability. All I can say is that the whispers were satisfied. The hunger was appeased, at least for a while. And in that moment, I felt a surge of power, a terrifying sense of transformation. But it didn't bring the enlightenment or the transcendence I had been promised. Instead, it brought a cold, empty feeling, a profound sense of loss. The man I once was, Chris the data entry clerk who dreamed of a slightly better life, was gone. Something else had taken his place. Something darker, something driven by a hunger that could never truly be satisfied. The transformation wasn't complete, not yet. The whispers assured me of that. This was just the beginning. There were more steps to take, more potential to unlock. And with each step, the line between me and whatever I was becoming blurred further. I left the warehouse in a daze, the metallic object feeling like a part of me now, an extension of my own corrupted will. The city lights seemed dimmer, the sounds muffled, as if I had moved into a different frequency, a different reality. Over the next few weeks, the changes continued. My appearance started to reflect the darkness within. I became gaunt, my eyes sunken and shadowed. I avoided mirrors. The reflection that stared back was barely recognizable. The hunger persisted, but now it was different. It wasn't just a craving for power, it was a need to consume. To take something from others, to add it to myself. The whispers guided me, pointing out individuals, those who possessed something I now craved. I became a predator, stalking the shadows, my enhanced intellect now twisted to serve darker purposes. The skills I had once used to excel at my mundane job were now tools for manipulation and control. I could see people's weaknesses, their fears, their desires, and I knew how to exploit them. My notoriety in the darker corners of the internet grew, but not in the way I had initially imagined. The whispers had shown me how to become someone truly feared, someone who operated in the deepest shadows, leaving no trace. The transformation Silas had promised was complete, but it was a transformation into something monstrous. The authorities eventually connected Riley Townsend's disappearance to me. They found traces, fragments of evidence that even my enhanced intellect couldn't completely erase. They started asking questions, their investigations slowly closing in. But by then, I was long gone. The whispers had shown me how to disappear, how to erase my existence from the grid. I left my old life behind, my apartment, my job, everything that had once defined me. Now, I wander the edges of society, a ghost in the machine, forever driven by the insatiable hunger. The whispers are my constant companions, guiding me, pushing me towards ends I can barely comprehend. I am Chris, or at least I was. Looking back at that fateful transaction, that simple click that led me down the rabbit hole, I know now that the buyer's remorse I feel is far more profound than just regret. It's a gnawing, eternal despair. They called me one of the most wanted. Perhaps they still do. But the truth is, the most wanted thing is me. Or rather, what I've become. A cautionary tale whispered in the shadows of the internet, a testament to the deadly consequences of seeking power in the wrong places. And if you ever stumble upon a listing promising to unlock potential in the dark corners of the web, take my advice. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because the potential it unlocks might just be your own horrifying end. And the whispers never truly stop. They're always there, waiting for the next one to take the plunge. Waiting to claim another soul. And maybe, just maybe, they're whispering your name right now. My name is Alex, and frankly, I never thought I'd be sitting here, in some dingy motel room on the outskirts of nowhere, tapping out this confession on a burner laptop that probably has more spyware on it than a Russian embassy. But here I am. I thought turning informant would get me off the hook, buy me some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. Turns out, the FBI, for all their supposed intelligence, doesn't know the half of what I've done. And Sarah? Well, Sarah is the key to all of this, the linchpin in this whole damn mess. It started innocently enough, as these things usually do. A bad debt, a stupid decision fueled by too much cheap beer and a desperate need for cash. I got involved with the wrong kind of people, the kind whose smiles don't reach their eyes and whose handshakes feel like a threat. Before I knew it, I was in too deep, running errands, making drops, and witnessing things that would curdle your blood. Things I still see when I close my eyes at night, the kind of memories that cling to you like a second skin. That's where Sarah comes in. I met her through the organization. The organization makes it sound far too official. It was more like a loose collection of predators, all circling the same pot of dirty money. Sarah was different, though. At least, she seemed different at first. She had this quiet intensity about her, a way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through your carefully constructed facade. We were never close, not in the traditional sense. Our interactions were always transactional, centered around the tasks we were assigned. But there was an unspoken understanding, a shared awareness of the darkness we were both swimming in. Things started to unravel about 6 months ago. The heat was turning up, whispers of informants within the ranks, increased surveillance. Paranoia became the air we breathed. That's when the FBI showed up on my doorstep, 2 sharp-suited agents with cold eyes and even colder smiles. They knew things, details that only someone on the inside would know. They laid it all out for me, the charges they could bring, the years I could spend rotting in some federal penitentiary. Then came the offer, the lifeline they dangled in front of my drowning face. Information. They wanted names, dates, locations, everything. In exchange, they promised leniency, a chance to walk away, to disappear. Desperate, I took it. I started feeding them scraps at first, low-hanging fruit to prove my worth. Then, as the pressure mounted, both from the feds wanting more and the organization growing increasingly suspicious, I had to give them something bigger, something that would solidify my position as a valuable asset. That's when Sarah became more than just a name. The FBI was particularly interested in her. They wouldn't tell me why, only that she was a person of interest in a number of ongoing investigations. They pressed me for details about her activities, her contacts, anything I knew. And I told them what I could, carefully omitting the more personal details, the things that would reveal my own complicity in their operations. Turning informant was supposed to be my way out, my chance to wash my hands clean of the whole damn mess. But the deeper I got, the more I realized that there was no escaping the darkness. The things I had done, the things I had seen, they were etched into my soul. And Sarah, she was tied to all of it, in ways that even the FBI couldn't comprehend. The other night, I had a dream. I was back in the warehouse, the one where things went sideways that night in October. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something else, something metallic and sickeningly sweet. I saw Sarah there, not as she is now, but younger, almost innocent. She was standing in the shadows, her eyes wide with fear, watching as, no, I can't write about that. Not yet. The memory is still too raw, too vivid. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that I couldn't just walk away from this. Not with Sarah still out there, not with the secrets we both share. The FBI thinks they're using me, that I'm their puppet on a string. But they have no idea what they've stumbled into. They think they're dealing with a too-big criminal looking for a way out, but they've just scratched the surface of a story that goes much deeper, into places they wouldn't dare to imagine. And Sarah, she's at the heart of it all. The FBI is looking for a criminal, but they don't realize that they're hunting something far more sinister. Something that I helped create. Something that might just consume us all. I need to be careful. They're watching me. I know they are. Every shadow seems to hold a pair of eyes. Every passing car feels like surveillance. But I have to get this story out, piece by piece, before it's too late. Before the darkness closes in completely. And maybe, just maybe, by telling the truth, I can finally find some kind of redemption. Or maybe I'm just fooling myself. Either way, this is my story, and it starts with Sarah. My dealings with Sarah were always peculiar. She had a knack for getting under your skin without saying a word. There was this unsettling calmness about her, even in the most chaotic situations. While the rest of us were sweating bullets during a tense meeting or a risky operation, Sarah would remain composed, her expression unreadable. It was like she knew something we didn't, or perhaps she simply didn't care. One particular incident sticks out in my mind. We were tasked with collecting a package from a drop-off point in a seedy part of town. It was supposed to be a simple in-and-out job, but things went south quickly. We were ambushed by a rival crew, and a firefight erupted. Bullets were flying, glass was shattering, and the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder. Everyone was scrambling for cover, adrenaline pumping, hearts racing. Except Sarah. She moved with this eerie grace, weaving through the chaos as if she were in a trance. She retrieved the package without a scratch, her face as placid as a still lake. I remember staring at her, my gun still raised, wondering if she was even human. After that night, I started paying closer attention to her. I noticed things others seemed to miss. The way she would sometimes stare into the distance, her eyes unfocused, as if she were seeing something that wasn't there. The faint, almost imperceptible smile that would occasionally play on her lips at the most inappropriate moments. The way people seemed to instinctively give her a wide berth, even the hardened criminals we worked with. I tried asking around about her, but nobody seemed to know much. She'd only been with the organization for a couple of years, and she kept to herself. She didn't socialize, didn't engage in the usual banter. She was an enigma, a ghost in our midst. The more I observed her, the more uneasy I became. There was a darkness radiating from her, a subtle but palpable aura of something wrong. It wasn't something I could put my finger on, just a feeling, a creeping sense of dread that would settle in my stomach whenever she was near. When the FBI started asking about her, that feeling intensified. They were unusually interested in her, more so than in some of the higher-ranking members of the organization. They showed me photos, asked about her habits, her relationships. I told them what I knew, which wasn't much. But I could sense their frustration, their belief that I was holding back. "You're sure you don't know anything more about Sarah Miller?" Agent Davies asked me, his gaze unwavering. "Anything at all? Any unusual behavior? Anything she might have said?" I hesitated. There was one thing, a small incident I had almost forgotten. A few months back, we were on a long drive, transporting some sensitive materials. It was late, and we were both tired and on edge. Out of nowhere, Sarah started humming a tune. It was a strange melody, unsettling and vaguely familiar, like a half-forgotten nursery rhyme played backward. When I asked her what it was, she just smiled that faint, unsettling smile and said, "Oh, it's just something my grandmother used to sing." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now, under Agent Davies' intense scrutiny, the memory sent a shiver down my spine. There was something about that tune, something ancient and malevolent. There was one thing, I said slowly, recounting the story about the humming. Davies leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the way he was trying to piece together the fragments of information I was giving him. But I still hadn't told him the half of it. I hadn't told him about the dreams, the nightmares that had started plaguing me after that night in the warehouse. Dreams filled with shadows and whispers, with the metallic smell of blood and that haunting melody. Dreams where Sarah would appear, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light, her smile widening into something monstrous. I also hadn't told him about the book. A few weeks before I went to the FBI, I stumbled upon something in Sarah's apartment. We were supposed to be laying low at a safe house, a dingy little place above a laundromat. Sarah had gone out to get supplies, and I was killing time, idly rummaging through the few possessions she had brought with her. Tucked away under her mattress, I found a small, leather-bound book. It was old, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The script was in a language I didn't recognize, filled with strange symbols and intricate illustrations that seemed to writhe and twist as I looked at them. I didn't understand any of it, but the book emanated a palpable sense of dread, a feeling of ancient evil that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I quickly put it back, trying to pretend I hadn't seen it. But the image of those disturbing symbols was burned into my mind. Looking back, I realized that those were the first real warning signs, the first glimpses into the true nature of Sarah. But I had dismissed them, chalking them up to stress and paranoia. I had been too focused on my own survival to see the danger that was lurking right beside me. Now, it's all coming together. The strange incidents, the unsettling demeanor, the FBI's intense interest, the nightmares, the book, it all points to something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Sarah isn't just a criminal, she's something else entirely. Something otherworldly. And I, in my desperate attempt to save my own skin, have inadvertently unleashed something truly terrifying into the world. The FBI thinks they're hunting a person, but they're about to find out that they're dealing with a nightmare made flesh. And I'm caught in the middle, trapped between the devil and the deep blue sea. I need to figure out what Sarah is, what that book was, and how to stop whatever she's planning before it's too late. Because I have a feeling that the horrors I've witnessed so far are just the beginning. The real nightmare is just about to begin. And Sarah is going to be the star of the show. The more I thought about the book, the more certain I became that it held the key to understanding Sarah. The strange symbols, the oppressive feeling it exuded, it wasn't just an old book, it was something else, something significant. I had to see it again. My handlers at the FBI had moved me to a different motel after my initial contact, a slightly less dilapidated establishment about an hour outside the city. They kept a close eye on me, but there were moments when I was left alone, ostensibly to process everything and prepare for my testimony. It was during one of these moments that I made my decision. I had to go back to the safe house. I knew it was risky. The organization might have already found out I was cooperating. Sarah might have returned. But the need to know, to understand the truth about her, outweighed the fear. I concocted a flimsy excuse for my handler, Agent Miller, no relation to Sarah, thankfully, telling her I needed to retrieve some personal belongings I had left behind. She was reluctant but eventually agreed to let me go, with a tail, of course. I managed to lose him within the first few blocks. It wasn't difficult. These guys were bureaucrats, not street thugs. The safe house looked just as I remembered it, the faded yellow paint peeling from the walls, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap detergent. I let myself in with the spare key I had pocketed, my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment was eerily silent, dust motes dancing in the weak sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. Sarah's room was as sparse as ever. A single bed, a small dresser, and the lingering scent of something vaguely floral and unsettlingly sweet. I went straight to the mattress, my hands trembling as I lifted it. The book was still there, tucked away in its hiding place. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers tracing the strange symbols on the cover. The leather felt cold and strangely smooth against my skin. I opened it carefully, the brittle pages rustling like dry leaves. The script was still incomprehensible, but as I flipped through the pages, the illustrations became clearer, more disturbing. They depicted grotesque figures engaged in bizarre rituals, celestial events aligning in ominous patterns, and shadowy entities lurking in the periphery. There was a sense of ancient power emanating from the book, a feeling that I was holding something that should have remained buried. Then I saw it. A drawing of a woman, her face obscured by shadow, but with a single, distinctive birthmark on her left hand, a crescent moon. Sarah had the same birthmark. It was faint, almost invisible, but I had noticed it once, a fleeting glimpse when she reached for something. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some random book. It was connected to Sarah, deeply and intimately. A realization dawned on me, chilling me to the bone. Sarah wasn't just involved with dangerous people, she was the danger. As I stared at the drawing, the air in the room seemed to grow colder. A faint whisper echoed in the stillness, a sound that seemed to come from the book itself, a sibilant murmur just on the edge of my hearing. I felt a presence in the room, a sense of being watched. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Sarah. Her eyes were different, whiter, darker, and they seemed to glow with an inner light. The faint smile that usually played on her lips was gone, replaced by a look of cold, predatory satisfaction. "Alex," she said, her voice soft but laced with an undercurrent of something ancient and malevolent. "I knew you couldn't resist." I tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. I scrambled backward, clutching the book to my chest like a shield. What are you?" I managed to stammer out. Sarah's smile returned, but it was no longer faint or unsettling. It was wide, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp, a little too long. "Let's just say I'm more than you ever imagined." She took a step closer, and the room seemed to darken around her. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a suffocating cloud. I could feel a pressure building in the air, a tangible sense of dread that threatened to crush me. I knew then that the FBI was out of their depth. Their investigations, their arrests, their petty games of cat and mouse, they were meaningless in the face of what Sarah truly was. I had stumbled into something far older, far more powerful than anything they could comprehend. And I was trapped. Sarah reached out a hand, her fingers long and slender, her nails like polished obsidian. I flinched, bracing for the inevitable. "You shouldn't have looked in the book, Alex," she said, her voice now a low, guttural growl. "Some doors are better left unopened." Just as her hand was about to touch me, a sudden noise from downstairs startled us both. A loud banging, followed by shouts. "The FBI!" They must have realized I had given them the slip. Sarah's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Our little chat will have to wait," she hissed, turning towards the door. "But don't think you can escape me, Alex. We have unfinished business." She disappeared out the door, leaving me alone in the room, the whispers still echoing in my ears. I didn't wait. I grabbed the book and fled, scrambling out of the apartment and into the alleyway. I don't know what the future holds. The FBI will probably arrest me. The organization will likely hunt me down. And Sarah is still out there, and I know she won't stop until she gets the book back. I'm writing this final part in another motel room, even further out in the sticks. I don't know how much longer I have. The nightmares are getting worse, the whispers are growing louder, and I can't shake the feeling that Sarah is getting closer. I tried to do the right thing, I really did. But in the end, I just made things worse. I opened a door that should have stayed closed, and now we're all going to pay the price. Especially Sarah. Because whatever she is, whatever power she wields, I have her book. And I have a feeling it's the only thing that can stop her. The fight is far from over. It's only just begun. And I have a terrible feeling that this is a story with no happy ending. Just darkness, and the haunting melody that Sarah hums in my dreams. A melody that promises only pain and eternal night. And the crescent moon birthmark, a chilling reminder of the evil I've unleashed. My name is Alex, and this is how my world ended. The flickering neon sign outside read Mike Steiner, a greasy spoon that had seen better decades. I wasn't the Mike it was named after, not anymore. These days, I mostly went by a digital ghost, a whisper in the encrypted channels of the dark web. But here, in this forgotten corner of Ohio, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee at 3 a.m., I was just me. Or at least, the closest I got to it. My real name is Michael Ramsey, a fact that felt increasingly foreign these past few years. Once, that name belonged to a bright-eyed kid who thought the internet was just for downloading music and chatting with girls in AIM. Then came the boredom, the curiosity, and the slow, seductive pull of the hidden networks. I started small, offering tech support for less than legal operations, then graduated to data scraping, and finally, the big leagues, information brokering. They called me Cypher. And for a while, I was damn good at it. I had eyes and ears in places most people couldn't even imagine. I knew secrets that could topple governments and ruin lives. I moved in the shadows, a phantom making deals and extracting intel for a clientele that ranged from paranoid CEOs to actual, honest-to-God mob bosses. It was a dangerous game, sure, but the thrill was intoxicating, the money even more so. For a guy who grew up in a trailer park, the digital underworld offered a twisted kind of upward mobility. But like they always say, the higher you climb, the further you have to fall. And my fall started with a file. It was labeled simply Nightingale. My usual gigs involve financial records, leaked databases, maybe the occasional compromising photos. This was different. The request came through a heavily encrypted channel, the kind usually reserved for clients with very deep pockets and even darker secrets. The price was astronomical, enough to set me up for life, 10 times over. Creed, that old familiar friend, whispered in my ear, drowning out the faint alarm bells ringing in my gut. The client was known only as Wraith. Their communication was clipped, professional, almost robotic. No personal details, no unnecessary chatter. Just the file name and the promise of payment upon delivery. I didn't ask questions. That was rule number 1 in my line of work. Curiosity could get you killed. But the name Nightingale gnawed at me. It felt significant, somehow. Like a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. It took me weeks to track down the file. It wasn't publicly available, not even on the deepest layers of the dark web. It was locked down, buried beneath layers of encryption I had never encountered before. I had to call in favors, exploit vulnerabilities I usually wouldn't touch, and practically live on caffeine and ramen noodles. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, I had it. Nightingale.zip. The file was heavily encrypted, of course. Military grade, or something close to it. It took another few days and a custom-built cracking rig running non-stop to finally break through. When the contents finally decrypted, I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe classified government documents, corporate espionage, something scandalous but ultimately mundane. What I found was anything but. The file contained a series of videos, each one more disturbing than the last. They appeared to be surveillance footage, taken from various locations: a nondescript office building, a suburban house, a dimly lit warehouse. The subjects were ordinary people, going about their daily lives. But there was something wrong. Something subtly off. In the first video, a man is sitting at his desk, working on a computer. He looks normal enough, but his movements are jerky, almost unnatural. His eyes dart around the room, not focusing on anything in particular. Then, a faint buzzing sound starts, inaudible at first, then growing louder, more insistent. The man twitches, his body convulsing slightly. He reaches up and scratches at his arm, drawing blood. The buzzing intensifies, and the man starts to scream, a silent scream, his mouth wide open but no sound coming out. His eyes roll back in his head, and he slumps forward onto the desk, motionless. The buzzing stops. The next video showed a woman at home, cooking dinner. Same thing. The subtle twitching, the growing buzzing sound, the silent scream, the collapse. Each video followed the same pattern, the victims seemingly struck down by some unseen force, their bodies reacting in the same horrifying way. I kept watching, my blood running cold. There were dozens of these videos, each one depicting a similar scene of inexplicable terror and death. Who were these people? What was happening to them? And what did Nightingale have to do with it? Then I saw the last video in the sequence. It was different. This one was taken from inside a car, the camera focused on the driver, a young woman. She looked terrified, her eyes wide with panic. The buzzing sound started almost immediately, much louder this time. She clawed at her head, whimpering. Then, a voice, distorted and electronic, echoed from the car's speakers. Subject Nightingale, termination sequence initiated. The woman's body went rigid. Her eyes glazed over. Her head snapped back against the headrest, and a thin stream of blood trickled from her nose. The buzzing stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Subject Nightingale. The name from the file. The name that had haunted me. It wasn't just a file name. It was a code name. For the victims. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What had I stumbled into? This wasn't just about stolen data or illicit deals. This was about something far more sinister, something inhuman. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hoax, some elaborate internet prank. But the realism of the videos, the sheer horror of the victim's final moments, felt too real. And the voice, that cold, detached, electronic voice, it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked back at the encrypted channel where I had received the request. Wraith was online. A single message sat waiting for me, payment confirmed. Deletion of the file is mandatory. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should have deleted it. Taken the money and run. Forgotten I ever saw Nightingale. But I couldn't. The faces of those people, their silent screams, were burned into my memory. I couldn't just let it go. Something was terribly wrong here. And I had a feeling that Nightingale was just the tip of the iceberg. I had to know more. I had to find out what was happening. That night, sitting in the dimly lit corner booth of Mike's Diner, the taste of stale coffee bitter on my tongue, I made a decision. I was done being Cypher, the ghost in the machine. It was time for Michael Ramsey to step back into the light, no matter how dangerous it might be. I had seen something I shouldn't have. And now, I was going to find out exactly what it meant. My days of lurking in the dark were over. I was about to step into a whole new kind of darkness. And this time, it felt like there was no turning back. My first step was to try and trace the origin of the Nightingale file. Wraith's communication was meticulously anonymized, routed through multiple servers across the globe. Standard digital forensics weren't going to cut it. I needed to go deeper, to tap into the old network of contacts I had cultivated during my time as Cypher. It was risky. Many of those connections were with individuals who wouldn't hesitate to turn me in if they thought it would benefit them. But I didn't have any other options. I fired up my old laptop, a heavily modified machine with layers of security protocols that would make a government spook blush. It had been gathering dust in a locked safe since I tried to go straight, but now it was time for one last dance with the devil. I navigated through the labyrinthine pathways of the dark web, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the familiar commands and protocols feeling like a forgotten language suddenly coming back to me. I reached out to a few trusted, as much as anyone in that world could be trusted, sources, individuals who specialized in tracing untraceable data and identifying anonymous entities. I kept the details vague, telling them I was investigating a high-level client and needed information about a specific encrypted file and a user known as Wraith. I offered them a substantial sum, a fraction of what Wraith had paid me, but still enough to pique their interest. Days turned into nights. I barely slept, haunted by the images from the Nightingale videos. The blank stares, the silent screams, the chilling voice uttering the word termination. It played on a loop in my mind, a constant reminder of the horror I had witnessed. I knew I couldn't just walk away from this. Those people deserved justice, or at least for their stories to be told. Finally, a response. It came through an encrypted dead drop, a message hidden within an image file on a defunct forum. One of my contacts, a notorious hacker known only as Ghost, had managed to dig up some dirt on Wraith. According to Ghost, Wraith was a relatively new player in the high-stakes information market, but they operated with a level of sophistication that suggested they had backing from a powerful organization. Their digital footprint was almost non-existent, but Ghost had managed to trace a few of their transactions back to a series of shell corporations registered in offshore tax havens. Nothing concrete, but it was a start. The other piece of information Ghost provided was more unsettling. He had encountered the Nightingale file, or at least fragments of similar data, in other restricted channels. Whispers of a clandestine program, codenamed Nightingale, that was supposedly being run by a shadowy branch within the US government. A program involving advanced neurological manipulation and remote assassination. It sounded like something straight out of a conspiracy thriller, too outlandish to be true. But the videos felt horrifyingly real. My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be true? Was Wraith working for the government? Were those innocent people in the videos victims of some kind of horrific experiment? The implications were staggering. If this was real, then I had stumbled upon a secret that powerful people would kill to protect. I knew I had to be careful. If Wraith was indeed connected to the government, then my every move was likely being watched. I couldn't trust anyone. I had to operate completely off the grid. I decided to dig deeper into the shell corporations Ghost had mentioned. It was tedious work, sifting through layers of legal jargon and financial records. But after days of relentless searching, I found a connection. One of the corporations had a subsidiary that had previously been awarded a government contract for neurological research. The contract was heavily redacted, but the keywords jumped out at me: advanced neural interfaces, remote influence, cognitive disruption. It was all starting to fit together in a terrifying way. Nightingale wasn't just a file, it was a program. A program that seemed to involve remotely controlling people and then terminating them. But why? What was the purpose? I went back to the videos, watching them again with a new perspective. I focused on the victims' eyes, their subtle twitches, the almost imperceptible changes in their expressions. It was like they were puppets, their strings being pulled by some unseen master. And the buzzing sound, could it be some kind of sonic weapon, a frequency designed to disrupt their neurological functions? I remembered the last video, the young woman in the car. Subject Nightingale, termination sequence initiated. It wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a deliberate execution. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Wraith wasn't just a broker, they were an executioner. And I had unwittingly delivered them the confirmation they needed. I had been a part of this, however unknowingly. The guilt was crushing. I had to expose this. I had to bring Nightingale to light. But how could I fight against a powerful, clandestine government organization? I was just one man, a former dark web hustler with a guilty conscience. Then I remembered the other part of the original prompt, the FBI. Could they be involved in this too? Or were they the ones I needed to turn to? The thought was both terrifying and hopeful. The FBI had the resources and the authority to investigate something like this, but what if they were already aware of Nightingale? What if they were part of it? I decided to take a calculated risk. I needed proof, something more than just the videos. I needed to find out who the victims were, where they came from, what their lives were like before they became subjects. I started by analyzing the surveillance footage, looking for any identifying details, a license plate, a street sign, a company logo. It was like searching for a needle in a digital haystack, but I had to try. Days blurred into weeks. I lived like a hermit, my apartment transformed into a makeshift war room, covered in printouts and scribbled notes. I barely ate, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for the truth. Finally, I caught a break. In one of the videos, taken inside the office building, I spotted a small, almost imperceptible detail in the background, a company calendar hanging on the wall. The name of the company was partially obscured, but I was able to make out enough letters to run a search. It took some digging, but eventually, I found a match. The company was a small tech startup based in California. I cross-referenced the employee roster with the faces in the videos. It was a long shot, but incredibly, I found a match. One of the victims, the man who had collapsed at his desk, was an engineer named David Chen. I found his social media profiles, his online presence painting a picture of an ordinary, hardworking man with a wife and 2 young children. He had no apparent connection to the dark web, no reason to be targeted. The same went for the other victims I was able to identify. They were all ordinary people from different walks of life, with nothing seemingly connecting them, except for the fact that they were all subjects of the Nightingale program. Now I had names. Now I had faces. Now I had a sliver of the truth. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I knew I couldn't go to the authorities with just this. They would dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, or worse, they might already be involved. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand the purpose of Nightingale, who was behind it, and how they were able to remotely control and kill people. And I had a growing suspicion that the answer might lie within the very organization that was supposed to protect its citizens, the FBI. The name Wraith kept echoing in my mind. It had a certain, official feel to it, like a code name assigned within a structured organization. My next move was going to be the most dangerous one yet. I was going to try and penetrate the impenetrable fortress of the FBI to find out if my suspicions were correct. I was stepping out of the shadows of the dark web and into a world where the stakes were even higher, a world where the line between right and wrong was blurred beyond recognition. And I knew, deep down, that there was a very real possibility I wouldn't be coming back. But the faces of the Nightingale victims wouldn't let me rest. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. Infiltrating the FBI, even remotely, was a fool's errand for most. But my years navigating the dark web had taught me a few tricks. I knew how to exploit vulnerabilities, how to mask my digital presence, and how to move through secure networks like a ghost. It took weeks of painstaking work, probing for weaknesses in their systems, mapping their internal architecture. I started with publicly available information, job postings, organizational charts, anything I could find to get a sense of their structure and personnel. Then came the deeper dives, exploiting unpatched security flaws in older software versions, using social engineering tactics to gain access to low-level employee accounts. It was a slow, methodical process, each step carrying the risk of detection and exposure. But the image of David Chen's lifeless face kept me going. I had to know the truth. I focused my efforts on the Bureau's internal research divisions, specifically looking for any mention of neurological studies or remote influence technologies. Most of the data was heavily protected, requiring multiple levels of authentication. But I was patient, persistent. I used specialized tools to bypass security protocols, decrypt encrypted files, and slowly pieced together the puzzle. What I found was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Project Nightingale wasn't just some rogue operation, it was a deeply embedded program within a clandestine branch of the FBI, operating in the shadows with virtually no oversight. The files I unearthed detailed decades of research into advanced neuroscience, focusing on the development of capable of remotely influencing and controlling human behavior. The buzzing sound in the videos? It wasn't a weapon, it was a trigger. A specific auditory frequency designed to activate dormant neural implants in the victims' brains. Implants that had been inserted without their knowledge or consent. The victims, identified by the codename Nightingale, were test subjects. Ordinary citizens who had been unknowingly tagged and monitored for years. The files contained their entire life histories, their medical records, their social media activity, every intimate detail of their existence meticulously documented. And Wraith? My suspicion was correct. It was a codename belonging to a high-ranking agent within the Nightingale program, responsible for overseeing the termination phase. The termination sequence was triggered remotely, sending a command to the neural implant that would induce a catastrophic neurological event, mimicking the symptoms I had seen in the videos. Asphyxia due to hanging was just one method. The files detailed others: sudden cardiac arrest, massive stroke, even self-inflicted accidents designed to look like suicides. The scope of the program was staggering. There were hundreds, possibly thousands, of Nightingale subjects across the country. Sleeper agents, living normal lives, completely unaware that they were being controlled, that their lives could be ended with the push of a button. But the most chilling revelation came when I delved deeper into the why. Why were these people being targeted? The initial files suggested they were considered potential threats, individuals who, for various reasons, might pose a risk to national security in the future. Activists, whistleblowers, even people who simply held dissenting political views. But as I dug further, the criteria became increasingly arbitrary, disturbingly vague. Some subjects were flagged for their financial instability, others for their mental health history, and some for reasons that were completely nonsensical. It seemed like the Nightingale program had become a tool for unchecked power, a way to eliminate anyone deemed undesirable by those in control. And then I found the files related to David Chen, the engineer from the first video. His threat assessment was based on an algorithm. An AI program that analyzed his online activity and flagged him as a potential risk due to his private communications with a journalist who was investigating government surveillance. He wasn't an actual threat, he was just someone who might have inadvertently stumbled upon a truth they wanted to keep hidden. The cold, detached efficiency of it was horrifying. These weren't targeted assassinations of known enemies. They were preemptive eliminations based on flawed algorithms and the paranoia of a select few individuals within the FBI. I felt a surge of rage. These people, these innocent lives extinguished like flickers of a candle. And I had played a part in it, unknowingly facilitating their deaths. The guilt was a heavy weight in my chest, threatening to suffocate me. I knew I had to expose this. I couldn't let this continue. But simply releasing the files I had found wouldn't be enough. They would be dismissed as forgeries, the work of a disgruntled hacker. I needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be denied. That's when I stumbled upon the Wraith protocol. It was a heavily encrypted file that detailed the chain of command within the Nightingale program, along with the real identities of the key players. And at the very top of the list, I saw a name that made my blood run cold: Agent Thomas Blackwood. Blackwood was a legendary figure within the FBI, a decorated agent with a spotless reputation. He was the kind of person you saw on the news, the embodiment of law and order. But according to this file, he was the architect of Nightingale, the one pulling the strings. I couldn't believe it. This pillar of the community, this symbol of justice, was orchestrating the remote assassinations of innocent civilians. It was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. I needed to get this information out, but I couldn't risk going directly to the authorities. They were likely compromised. I had to find another way. I thought back to my time in the dark web. There was a network of investigative journalists operating outside the mainstream media who specialized in uncovering government corruption and exposing hidden truths. They were risky to contact, but they were my only hope. Using secure channels, I reached out to one of them, a journalist known only as the Oracle. I provided a small, encrypted sample of the Nightingale files, enough to pique their interest without revealing the full extent of what I had uncovered. I told them I had evidence of a highly illegal government program involving remote manipulation and assassinations, and that I needed their help to bring it to light. The Oracle was skeptical at first, but after verifying the authenticity of the sample files, they agreed to meet. We arranged a rendezvous in a remote location, far from prying eyes. The meeting was brief and tense. I handed over the full unencrypted files, along with all the evidence I had gathered, including the identity of Agent Blackwood. The Oracle listened intently, their face growing increasingly grim as they absorbed the information. They promised to investigate further and to publish the story if everything checked out. I knew it was a risk, putting my trust in a stranger, but I had no other choice. As I left the meeting, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I had done what I could. I had exposed the truth, or at least set the wheels in motion for it to be exposed. But I also knew that I had made powerful enemies. Agent Blackwood and the Nightingale program would not take this lightly. My life was in danger. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see black SUVs pulling up, men in dark suits ready to take me away. But the road behind me was empty. For now. I knew I couldn't stay in one place for long. I had to disappear, to become Cypher once again, a ghost in the machine, always looking over my shoulder. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't just hiding in the shadows. I was running from a truth that was far more terrifying than anything I had ever encountered in the dark web. And as I vanished back into the digital ether, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Nightingale program was still out there, its invisible tendrils reaching into the lives of unsuspecting citizens, the buzzing sound a constant, silent threat in the background of our seemingly normal world. The truth was out there, buried deep within the system, waiting to be uncovered. And I had a feeling that my journey into the darkness was far from over. The static on the radio was the first thing that really felt wrong. Usually, the morning check-ins with dispatch were about as exciting as watching pine needles fall. This morning, though, all I got was hiss. Just pure, unadulterated white noise, like the world had suddenly gone mute. My name's Ben, by the way. Ben Carter. I've been a park ranger at Blackwood Canyon National Park for the last 5 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Bears wandering into campsites looking for a midnight snack, the occasional idiot trying to start a bonfire during a level 5 fire warning, even a couple of knuckleheads who thought it would be fun to get lost on purpose. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what the last 12 hours had been like. It started subtly enough. Yesterday was a typical late fall day in the canyon. The air was crisp, the leaves were mostly down, painting the trails in shades of ochre and red, and there was that quiet stillness that always settles over the park before the first real snowfall. We had a decent number of day hikers out, enjoying the last vestiges of mild weather. I spent most of my morning helping a group of elderly birdwatchers identify a particularly elusive warbler near Hemlock Creek. After lunch, I patrolled the trails around Lookout Point, making sure everyone was sticking to the marked paths and not leaving any trash behind. Standard ranger stuff. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I started getting the first unusual reports over the radio. A few hikers called in about someone behaving erratically on the Twin Falls Trail. They described a man stumbling, muttering to himself, and generally acting disoriented. We get that sometimes, people not used to the altitude, dehydration, or maybe just someone having a bad day. I radioed it in, and dispatch said they'd send a volunteer from the south entrance to check it out. That was the last coherent communication I heard from them. By the time my shift was supposed to end at 6, the radio was a mess of fragmented transmissions and panicked voices. I could pick up snippets. Something's happening at the campgrounds. People are attacking each other. Stay inside. Do not approach. It sounded like a bad disaster movie, the kind you'd roll your eyes at for being so over the top. Except, this was real. This was happening here, in Blackwood Canyon. My gut clenched. I tried to raise dispatch again, my voice tight with a growing sense of dread. Nothing but static. I was about 20 miles deep into the park, at the small ranger outpost near Oakhaven Lake. Usually, there are 2 of us stationed here, but my partner, Sarah, had taken a few days off to visit her family out of state. I was alone. I locked up the outpost, double-checking the windows and doors. The little cabin was sturdy enough to keep out wildlife, but against whatever was going on out there, I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my emergency pack, first aid kit, extra water, some protein bars, a map, compass, and my trusty multi-tool. My rifle, a standard issue for dealing with aggressive animals, felt cold and inadequate in my hands. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the woods were alive with the usual nighttime sounds, crickets chirping, owls hooting in the distance. But there was something else, too. A low, guttural moaning that seemed to be coming from the direction of the main campgrounds, about 5 miles to the north. It was unsettling, unnatural. I decided to stay put for the night. Hunkered down in the outpost, I tried to make sense of the garbled radio transmissions. One voice, a woman's, kept repeating the word hungry over and over, her tone shifting from distressed to almost predatory. Another sounded like a ranger, his voice strained and desperate. They just keep coming. God help us. Then, silence. Sleep didn't come easy. Every rustle of leaves outside, every creak of the cabin, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept the rifle close, my senses on high alert. The moaning from the north seemed to get closer, more insistent. Dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in hues of pale pink and gray. I cautiously opened the door and peered outside. The air was eerily still, the usual chorus of morning birds absent. A thick fog hung low over the lake, obscuring the far shore. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. I knew I couldn't stay in the outpost forever. My supplies were limited, and I had no idea what was happening beyond the park boundaries. I needed information. My best bet was to try and make it back to the park headquarters near the south entrance. It was a long hike, maybe 15 miles, but it was where the main communication equipment was located. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be them. I slung my pack over my shoulder, checked a rifle one last time, and stepped out into the silent morning. The fog swirled around me, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves. I hadn't gone more than a mile when I saw it. A figure stumbling out of the fog. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe injured or lost. But as it got closer, my blood ran cold. Its clothes were torn and stained, and it moved with an unnatural, jerky gait. Its head lolled to one side, and its jaw hung slack. And then I saw its face. Pale, gaunt, with vacant, bloodshot eyes. Its mouth opened in a silent snarl, revealing teeth that looked far too long and sharp. It reached out a hand, fingers gnarled and twitching. It wasn't injured. It wasn't lost. It was something else. Something dead. I froze for a split second, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, instinct took over. I raised my rifle, aimed for the chest, and fired. The shot echoed through the silent woods, the sound deafening. The figure staggered back, a surprised look on its decaying face, then crumpled to the ground. My hands were shaking as I approached it cautiously. It lay still, unmoving. The bullet had done its job. But the horror of what I had just done, what I had just seen, was starting to sink in. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a mountain lion. This was a person. Or at least, it used to be. More sounds reached me through the fog. Groaning, shuffling noises. And then another figure emerged, and then another. They were coming from the direction of the campgrounds. There were more of them. Many more. I didn't need anyone to tell me what was happening. The panicked radio messages, the unnatural behavior, the hunger in their eyes, it all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just some isolated incident. This was an outbreak. And I was right in the middle of it. I turned and ran, my boots pounding on the trail. The groaning and shuffling followed me, a chilling symphony of the undead. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my heart pounding in my chest, the image of that first dead face burned into my mind. The first 24 hours of the zombie outbreak. And I had just survived the first 12. The next 12, I suspected, would be hell. My lungs burned with each ragged breath as I sprinted down the winding trail. The sounds of the undead, their guttural moans and the clumsy thud of their feet echoed behind me, spurring me onward. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. 3 of them were visible through the thinning fog, their arms outstretched, their movements slow and jerky but undeniably relentless. They weren't fast, not yet, but there was a chilling determination in their shambling pursuit. I veered off the main trail, plunging into the dense undergrowth. Thorny bushes snagged at my uniform, and fallen logs tripped my feet, but I didn't dare slow down. The forest was my only ally now, a maze of trees and shadows that hopefully would provide some cover. I could hear them crashing through the brush behind me, their moans getting closer. They weren't just blindly following, They were tracking me by sound. I reached a small, rocky stream and without hesitation, plunged in. The icy water shocked my system, but I waded through, careful to step on submerged stones to avoid leaving tracks on the muddy banks. On the other side, I scrambled up the embankment and kept running, weaving through the trees, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the stream. The sun was starting to burn off the last of the fog, revealing the terrifying reality of what was happening. I saw no other hikers, no signs of life, only the eerie silence of a park that felt utterly deserted, except for the growing number of moaning figures in the distance. Hours blurred into a frantic mix of running, hiding, and listening. I avoided the main trails, sticking to the less traveled paths and the dense woods. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I encountered more of them, lone figures wandering aimlessly, small groups shambling through the trees. Each encounter filled me with a fresh wave of dread. These were my neighbors, the tourists who had come to enjoy the park, maybe even some of the volunteers I worked with. Now they were this. I managed to scavenge some wild berries, enough to stave off the worst of the hunger pangs, and refilled my water bottle from a clear mountain spring. The need for rest was a constant ache, but the thought of stopping for too long was terrifying. They could be anywhere. Once, I had to hide behind a fallen log as a small group of 4 or 5 passed by just a few feet away. The stench of decay was overwhelming, a nauseating mix of rot and something else, something sickly sweet. Their groans were low and constant, and their eyes, those vacant, bloodshot eyes, seemed to stare right through me even though they didn't see me. It was a primal, visceral fear that gripped me, the kind that chills you to the bone. As the day wore on, their numbers seemed to increase. I saw more and more of them, sometimes in larger groups, especially near the trails and the campgrounds. It was clear that whatever had happened, it had spread quickly and violently. My initial plan to reach park headquarters seemed increasingly suicidal. The main roads would likely be overrun. I needed a different way, a more secluded route. I pulled out my map, spreading it on moss-covered rock. My finger traced a faint, less-used trail that branched off the main path and led towards the old fire lookout tower on Eagle Peak. From there, I might be able to get a better view of the surrounding area and maybe even pick up a faint cell signal. It was a long shot, but it was the only plan I had. The trail to Eagle Peak was steep and overgrown, but it offered the advantage of being less likely to be populated by them. The climb was exhausting, my legs burning, but the higher I went, the fewer of the undead I encountered. The air grew thinner and cooler, and the panoramic views of the canyon began to emerge through the trees. Just as the sun began to dip below the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, I reached the lookout tower. It was a small, wooden structure perched precariously on the edge of the peak, usually locked and off-limits to the public. But the door was hanging open, the latch broken. Cautiously, I stepped inside. The tower consisted of a single room with large windows on all sides, offering a 360-degree view of the park. The radio equipment was old and outdated, probably not functional anymore. But the view was both breathtaking and horrifying. From my vantage point, I could see the extent of the devastation. Smoke rose in several places, likely from unattended campfires or perhaps something worse. The main roads leading into and out of the park were clogged with abandoned vehicles. And everywhere I looked, I saw them, hundreds, maybe thousands, of the undead, their slow, relentless movements like a plague spreading across the landscape. The campgrounds were swarming with them. The visitor center looked eerily silent and deserted. Blackwood Canyon, once a haven of natural beauty, had become a charnel house. Despair threatened to overwhelm me. Was I the only one left? Had anyone else survived this? Then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the distance, near the southern edge of the park. A small group of people, maybe 5 or 6, were moving quickly through the trees. They looked organized. They weren't shambling, they were running with purpose. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered in my chest. I wasn't alone. As darkness descended, I settled into the lookout tower, barricading the door as best I could with a heavy wooden table. The wind howled outside, and the temperature dropped sharply. I huddled in a corner, wrapped in my thin emergency blanket, my rifle clutched tightly in my hands. From my isolated perch, I watched the park below. The darkness hid many of the horrors, but the moans still carried on the wind, a constant reminder of the nightmare that had engulfed Blackwood Canyon. The small group I had seen earlier had disappeared into the trees. Were they survivors trying to escape? Were they heading towards help? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had survived the first 24 hours. But as the second night began, the question that haunted me was, could I survive the next? And what kind of world would be waiting for me if I did? The second night in the lookout tower was the longest of my life. Every creak of the aging wood, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, sounded like the approach of the undead. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I spent the hours staring out into the darkness, my senses strained, listening for any sign of movement below. The moans were still there, tarried on the night air, a constant, chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I cautiously peered out of the windows. The landscape below was still shrouded in a misty haze, but as the light grew stronger, the terrifying truth was revealed. Their numbers hadn't diminished. If anything, there seemed to be more of them, their figures dotting the landscape like grotesque, animated scarecrows. The group I'd seen the previous evening was gone. I couldn't tell if they had escaped the park or had simply moved out of my line of sight. A wave of loneliness washed over me, the stark reality of my isolation sinking in. My supplies were dwindling. I had a little water left and a couple of protein bars. I knew I couldn't stay in the tower indefinitely. Eventually, they would find me, or I would run out of food and water. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it soon. Looking out across the vast expanse of the park, I tried to think logically. Park headquarters was still the most likely place to find help, if any help existed. But the main trails were undoubtedly swarming with the undead. I needed an alternative route. My gaze fell upon the old logging road that snaked along the western edge of the park. It was rough and rarely used, but it skirted the main areas of the outbreak that I could see. It was a longer route, but it might be my only chance. I packed my remaining supplies, checked my rifle, and descended from the tower. The morning air was cold and damp, and the silence was unnerving. I moved slowly and deliberately, sticking to the cover of the trees, constantly scanning my surroundings. The logging road was as bad as I remembered, overgrown with weeds and littered with fallen branches. But it was deserted. For hours I walked, my senses on high alert, but I saw no sign of the undead. A fragile sense of hope began to build within me. Maybe, just maybe, I could make it out of this alive. Around midday, I reached a small, abandoned logging cabin nestled in a clearing. The door was unlocked, and I cautiously entered. It was dusty and run down, but it was dry and offered a temporary respite from the elements. Inside, I found a few cans of old, forgotten food in a cupboard, peaches, surprisingly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a much-needed boost of energy. As I ate, I noticed something glinting in the corner of the cabin. It was an old CB radio, coated in dust. On a whim, I flipped the power switch. Static filled the small room, but then, through the hiss, I heard a faint voice. "Anyone out there? Can anyone hear me?" The voice was weak and crackly, but it was definitely there. My heart leaped. "This is Ranger Carter. Do you read me?" I shouted into the microphone, my voice trembling with excitement. There was a moment of silence, then the voice replied, stronger this time. "Ranger Carter? Is that really you? We thought everyone in the park was gone." "No, I'm here," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "What's going on? What happened?" The voice on the other end belonged to a dispatcher from the county emergency services. He explained that a highly aggressive virus had swept through the region, causing rapid death and reanimation. Blackwood Canyon had been hit hard, likely due to the large number of tourists. They were trying to establish quarantine zones and rescue any survivors they could find. He asked for my location, and I told him about the logging cabin. He said they would try to send someone for me, but it would take time. The area was chaotic, and resources were stretched thin. He told me to stay put and keep the radio on. Hope surged through me, stronger than before. Help was coming. I had made contact. I wasn't alone. But my relief was short-lived. As I sat in the cabin, listening to the crackling radio, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of moaning, coming from outside. They had found me. I grabbed my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered out the window. Two of them were shambling towards the cabin, their eyes fixed on the open door. More were emerging from the trees. They must have been drawn by the sound of my voice on the radio. The dispatcher's voice crackled from the radio. "Ranger Carter, what's happening? Are you still there?" "They're here," I said, my voice tight with fear. "They found me." "Stay strong, Ranger," he said. "Help is on its way. Just hold out." Holding out. That was easier said than done. The cabin door wouldn't keep them out for long. I needed to move, to find a way to survive until help arrived. I looked around the small cabin, my eyes scanning for anything I could use. My gaze fell upon a rusty old axe leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The first of the undead reached the cabin, its decaying hands reaching for the door. I took a deep breath, gripped the axe tightly, and braced myself. The next few hours would be the longest, and likely the most dangerous, of my life. I had survived the first 24 hours of the zombie outbreak. Now, I had to survive until rescue came. And in the desolate silence of the abandoned logging cabin, with the moans of the undead closing in, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. This was just the beginning. The second night in the lookout tower was the longest of my life. Every creak of the aging wood, Every gust of wind that rattled the windows sounded like the approach of the undead. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I spent the hours staring out into the darkness, my senses strained, listening for any sign of movement below. The moans were still there, tarried on the night air, a constant, chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, I cautiously peered out of the windows. The landscape below was still shrouded in a misty haze, but as the light grew stronger, the terrifying truth was revealed. Their numbers hadn't diminished. If anything, there seemed to be more of them, their figures dotting the landscape like grotesque, animated scarecrows. The group I'd seen the previous evening was gone. I couldn't tell if they had escaped the park or had simply moved out of my line of sight. A wave of loneliness washed over me, the stark reality of my isolation sinking in. My supplies were dwindling. I had a little water left and a couple of protein bars. I knew I couldn't stay in the tower indefinitely. Eventually, they would find me, or I would run out of food and water. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it soon. Looking out across the vast expanse of the park, I tried to think logically. Park headquarters was still the most likely place to find help, if any help existed. But the main trails were undoubtedly swarming with the undead. I needed an alternative route. My gaze fell upon the old logging road that snaked along the western edge of the park. It was rough and rarely used, but it skirted the main areas of the outbreak that I could see. It was a longer route, but it might be my only chance. I packed my remaining supplies, checked my rifle, and descended from the tower. The morning air was cold and damp, and the silence was unnerving. I moved slowly and deliberately, sticking to the cover of the trees, constantly scanning my surroundings. The logging road was as bad as I remembered, overgrown with weeds and littered with fallen branches. But it was deserted. For hours I walked, my senses on high alert, but I saw no sign of the undead. A fragile sense of hope began to build within me. Maybe, just maybe, I could make it out of this alive. Around midday, I reached a small, abandoned logging cabin nestled in a clearing. The door was unlocked, and I cautiously entered. It was dusty and run down, but it was dry and offered a temporary respite from the elements. Inside, I found a few cans of old, forgotten food in a cupboard, peaches, surprisingly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a much-needed boost of energy. As I ate, I noticed something glinting in the corner of the cabin. It was an old CB radio, coated in dust. On a whim, I flipped the power switch. Static filled the small room, but then, through the hiss, I heard a faint voice. "Anyone out there? Can anyone hear me?" The voice was weak and crackly, but it was definitely there. My heart leaped. "This is Ranger Carter. Do you read me?" I shouted into the microphone, my voice trembling with excitement. There was a moment of silence, then the voice replied, stronger this time. "Ranger Carter? Is that really you? We thought everyone in the park was gone." "No, I'm here," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "What's going on? What happened?" The voice on the other end belonged to a dispatcher from the county emergency services. He explained that a highly aggressive virus had swept through the region, causing rapid death and reanimation. Blackwood Canyon had been hit hard, likely due to the large number of tourists. They were trying to establish quarantine zones and rescue any survivors they could find. He asked for my location, and I told him about the logging cabin. He said they would try to send someone for me, but it would take time. The area was chaotic, and resources were stretched thin. He told me to stay put and keep the radio on. Hope surged through me, stronger than before. Help was coming. I had made contact. I wasn't alone. But my relief was short-lived. As I sat in the cabin, listening to the crackling radio, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of moaning, coming from outside. They had found me. I grabbed my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered out the window. 2 of them were shambling towards the cabin, their eyes fixed on the open door. More were emerging from the trees. They must have been drawn by the sound of my voice on the radio. The dispatcher's voice crackled from the radio. "Ranger Carter, what's happening? Are you still there?" "They're here," I said, my voice tight with fear. "They found me." "Stay strong, Ranger," he said. "Help is on its way. Just hold out." Holding out. That was easier said than done. The cabin door wouldn't keep them out for long. I needed to move, to find a way to survive until help arrived. I looked around the small cabin, my eyes scanning for anything I could use. My gaze fell upon a rusty old axe leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The first of the undead reached the cabin, its decaying hands reaching for the door. I took a deep breath, gripped the axe tightly, and braced myself. The next few hours would be the longest, and likely the most dangerous, of my life. I had survived the first 24 hours of the zombie outbreak. Now, I had to survive until rescue came. And in the desolate silence of the abandoned logging cabin, with the moans of the undead closing in, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. This was just the beginning. By the way, I noticed web and app activity isn't currently enabled for this Google account. Turning on web and app activity in your My Google activity page will allow me to give more tailored and useful responses in the future. My name is Alex. Just a regular guy, I thought. 30-something, work a dead-end IT job, live in a quiet little suburban house with a patchy lawn and a mailbox that always seems to be slightly askew. Nothing about my life screamed thrilling or mysterious, let alone horror story in the making. My biggest daily drama usually revolved around whether or not the coffee in the office break room was still hot. That was until a few nights ago. It started innocently enough. I was cleaning out my old computer, the one I hadn't used since I built my new rig last year. You know how it is, you keep old tech around just in case, and then it sits in a corner gathering dust bunnies the size of small rodents. This old machine had been my trusty companion for years. It held old documents, embarrassing teenage attempts at songwriting, and a whole lot of digital clutter. I figured it was time to wipe the hard drive and maybe donate it or something. As I was going through the files, preparing for the inevitable digital cleanse, I stumbled upon a folder I didn't recognize. It was simply labeled Project Chimera. Now, I'm not usually one for conspiracy theories or delving into the unknown, but the name itself had a strange pull. Chimera, the mythical beast cobbled together from different animals. What kind of project would I, of all people, have named that? Curiosity, the one human flaw that always gets us into trouble, got the better of me. I clicked on the folder. Inside, there were a series of encrypted files, all dated within the last 6 months, a period when I was actively using this old computer for some specific side communication. I racked my brain trying to remember what Project Chimera could possibly be. Nothing came to mind. I knew I used encrypted channels for certain online activities, mostly coordinating with a few friends on some, let's just say, rather niche online communities. We valued our privacy, and encryption was standard practice. But what were these files? And why couldn't I remember creating them? The encryption was strong, the kind I hadn't used in years, a multi-layered system with a key phrase I vaguely recalled setting up for a particularly sensitive exchange back when I was more paranoid, perhaps. It took me a while, a good hour of digging through old notes and forgotten digital documents, but I finally managed to piece together the decryption key. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed it in, a sense of unease settling in my stomach. It felt like I was about to uncover something I wasn't supposed to see. The first file opened, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a document, or an image, or anything I expected. It was an audio file. The timestamp indicated it was from about 5 months ago. Hesitantly, I clicked play. The first voice I heard was mine. That much was undeniable. It was a recording of a conversation I had with someone I only knew online as Spectre. We were discussing something. The details were hazy at first, obscured by our usual coded language and inside jokes. But as the conversation progressed, a sickening realization dawned on me. We weren't just chatting about some obscure online game or a shared interest in vintage sci-fi. We were talking about David. David was a mutual acquaintance, someone we both knew from another online forum, a place dedicated to amateur writers. He was a quiet guy, a little socially awkward, but generally well-liked. We had several private conversations with him over the past year, mostly offering encouragement on his writing projects. Now, listening to this recording, I heard my own voice, along with Spectre's, dissecting David's personality, his online habits, his insecurities. We were talking about him in a way that felt invasive, almost predatory. Did you see his post in the writing group today? Spectre's voice echoed from my speakers, a distorted, digital whisper. He's still stuck on that same plot point. Says he's feeling blocked. My own voice replied, smooth and casual, a tone that now felt alien and repulsive to me. Yeah, I saw it. Pathetic, really. You'd think after all this time he'd have figured out something so basic. The conversation continued in this vein, a cruel and unwarranted critique of someone who had never done anything to us. We analyzed his writing style, mocked his attempts at humor, and even speculated about his personal life based on his forum posts. It was vile. It was mean-spirited. And it was me. Or at least, it was a version of me that I didn't recognize, a version I desperately didn't want to be. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What had possessed me to talk about David like that? And why didn't I remember any of this? I had no recollection of this conversation, no memory of harboring such negative feelings towards him. I quickly closed the audio file, my heart pounding in my chest. Maybe it was just a one-off, a moment of weakness, a bad day where I let my frustrations get the better of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There were dozens more files in the Project Chimera folder, all time-stamped over the past 6 months, all encrypted conversations. And they all seemed to involve David. With trembling hands, I opened another file. This one was more recent, from just a few weeks ago. Again, I heard my voice in Spector's. But this time, the tone was different. There was an undercurrent of something darker, something more sinister. "He's been getting closer," Spector said, their voice laced with a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. "He almost figured it out yesterday. He posted a comment that was unsettlingly accurate." Did he suspect us? I heard my own voice ask, the words sounding distant and detached. "Not directly," Spector replied. "But he's asking the right questions. He's starting to connect the dots. We need to be careful." Connect the dots? What were we doing that David could possibly figure out? What dots were there to connect? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the fragments of conversation I was hearing. The recording continued, and the implications of what I was listening to began to send shivers down my spine. We were talking about manipulating David, about subtly influencing his thoughts and actions through our online interactions. We were discussing planting ideas in his head, guiding him down certain paths. For what purpose, I couldn't yet tell. But the way we spoke about him, as if he were a puppet on strings, was deeply disturbing. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I looked around my quiet, ordinary living room, the familiar surroundings now seeming alien and threatening. Who was I talking to? What was Spector really? And more importantly, what were we doing to David? I had to know more. I had to listen to the rest of these recordings, no matter how unsettling they might be. I felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that I had stumbled upon something truly horrifying, something that might change everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me. This wasn't just about mean online comments anymore. This felt like something much, much worse. And David was at the center of it all. I spent the rest of the night and the better part of the following day lost in the labyrinth of Project Chimera. Each encrypted audio file I decrypted peeled back another layer of a reality I didn't know existed, a reality where I was a participant in something deeply unsettling. The conversations between my digital self and Spector became increasingly disturbing, revealing a calculated and manipulative approach towards David that chilled me to the bone. As I listened to more recordings, the purpose of our actions started to become horrifyingly clear. We weren't just gossiping or being mean-spirited. We were actively trying to isolate David, to erode his confidence, to subtly push him towards a state of despair. We would discuss his online posts, identify his vulnerabilities, and then strategize how to exploit them in our subsequent interactions with him. In one recording from about 3 months ago, Spector suggested, he mentioned feeling like his writing is going nowhere. Maybe we should gently steer him towards darker themes, suggest he explore more personal struggles. My voice, cold and calculating, replied, "Good idea. Plant the seed of self-doubt. Make him think his current style is too light, too superficial. We need him to feel like he needs to delve into the abyss to find his true voice." They discussed specific comments they had made on David's work, carefully crafted to sound supportive on the surface but laced with subtle criticisms designed to undermine his self-esteem. They talked about how they had encouraged him to share more personal details about his life, feigning empathy while secretly cataloging his insecurities and fears for future exploitation. The level of premeditation and cruelty in these recordings was sickening. I couldn't reconcile the voice I was hearing with the person I believed myself to be. Was this truly me? Had I become this manipulative and callous individual without even realizing it? The thought was terrifying. As I delved deeper into the archive, the conversations took an even darker turn. The focus shifted from simply undermining David's confidence to actively manipulating his emotions and perceptions. They discussed ways to isolate him from his other online friends, to create friction and misunderstandings. In one particularly chilling exchange, Spectre said, "He seems to trust Booklover87 a lot. Maybe we should create a fake profile and start spreading some rumors about them. Nothing too obvious, just enough to sow seeds of doubt." My voice responded, "Excellent. Make it seem like Booklover87 is secretly making fun of his writing behind his back. Use some of the details he shared in private messages. That should do the trick." Listening to this, I felt a wave of revulsion so strong I almost vomited. The sheer audacity of it, the calculated cruelty directed at someone who had done nothing but share his passion and vulnerabilities with us. And the fact that I was a willing participant in this, it was almost unbearable to comprehend. The recordings continued, painting a picture of a systematic and insidious campaign against David. They discussed his decreasing activity in the online writing group, noting with satisfaction how their efforts seemed to be paying off. "He hasn't posted anything in days," Spectre observed in one recording from a month ago. His last message was pretty downbeat. "I think he's finally starting to crack." "Good," my voice replied. "Keep the pressure on. We're almost there." "Almost where?" I found myself whispering to the empty room. What was the end game? What were we trying to achieve by driving David to this apparent breaking point? The answer, when it finally came, was even more horrifying than I could have imagined. In a recording from just a week ago, the conversation took a shocking and macabre turn. "He's been posting some really disturbing stuff lately," Spectre said, their voice laced with a strange anticipation. "Almost like he's writing his way out." My voice responded, a disturbingly calm tone, "Yes, I've seen it. The descent into darkness is almost complete. He's playing right into our hands." "Do you think he'll actually do it?" Spectre asked, the question hanging heavy in the digital air. There was a pause before my voice replied, cold and devoid of any empathy. "It's the logical conclusion, isn't it? We've nurtured his despair, amplified his insecurities, isolated him from any support. We've painted him into a corner. Now, it's just a matter of time." The implication of those words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about David quitting the online writing group. They were talking about something far more permanent, far more tragic. They were talking about pushing him to the brink of suicide. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The weight of what I had just heard was crushing. I felt a profound sense of guilt and horror. What had I become? How could I have been a part of something so monstrous? I had to do something. I had to warn David. But how? I hadn't spoken to him directly in weeks, maybe even months, as per our strategy outlined in the recordings. Would he even believe me? And what about Spectre? Who were they? And why were they doing this? As I sat there, reeling from the revelations, another thought struck me, a thought even more chilling than the last. The recordings were all from my old computer, from a specific period when I was engaged in these encrypted conversations. But why did I have no memory of any of it? It was as if a significant chunk of my recent past had been erased, leaving behind only these horrifying digital echoes. Could Spectre be responsible for that? Had they somehow manipulated my own memories, turning me into an unwitting accomplice in their twisted game? The possibility was terrifying, suggesting a level of control and manipulation far beyond anything I had initially imagined. I decided I had to try to reach out to David. I logged into the online writing forum, my hands still trembling. I found his profile and saw that he had indeed been inactive for several days. His last post was a short, cryptic message that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The shadows are closing in. There's no escape. I quickly typed out a private message, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I told him everything, about the recordings, about what I had heard, about my own confusion and horror. I didn't hold back, laying bare the extent of our manipulation. I urged him to get help, to talk to someone, anyone. I gave him my phone number and pleaded with him to call me. After sending the message, I felt a surge of adrenaline followed by a wave of exhaustion. I had done what I could. Now all I could do was wait and hope. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, another message popped up. It was from Spectre. My blood ran cold. How did they know I had logged in? Were they watching me? The message was short and chillingly simple. Alex, we need to talk. You've been listening to things you shouldn't have. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just some online prank gone wrong. This was real. And I was in the middle of something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The surveillance wasn't just directed at David. It was directed at me too. And now that I knew their secret, I was afraid I had become their next target. The message from Spectre sent a jolt of pure fear through me. How did they know? Had they been monitoring my activity all along? The encrypted channels we used, I thought they were secure. This realization was more terrifying than anything I had heard in the recordings. It meant I wasn't just a passive listener to this horrifying plot. I was a player in it, and now the game had turned in my direction. I stared at the message on the screen, the words, Alex, we need to talk. You've been listening to things you shouldn't have, burning into my retinas. I felt a desperate urge to unplug my computer, to run and hide, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I was in too deep. Hesitantly, I replied to Spectre's message. Who is this? How do you know my name? I typed, my fingers clumsy and unsure on the keyboard. The response came almost immediately. You know who this is, Alex. We've been working together for months. As for how I know your name, well, we know a lot about each other, don't we? Their words sent a chill down my spine. They were right. We had shared personal details in our conversations, though I couldn't recall anything too specific. The encryption had created a sense of anonymity, a feeling of being insulated from the real world. Now, that illusion was shattered. What do you want? I typed back, my voice trembling despite the digital barrier. We need to discuss what you've heard, Spectre replied. It seems you've stumbled upon something sensitive. Something that was never meant for your ears. You were manipulating David, I wrote, my anger and fear momentarily overriding my caution. You were trying to drive him to suicide. There was a long pause before Spectre responded. You misunderstand the situation, Alex. We were helping him. He was lost, adrift. We were guiding him towards a release. Their words were chillingly detached, completely devoid of any remorse or empathy. This wasn't just about online manipulation. This was something far more sinister, bordering on a cult-like mentality. That's insane, I typed back. You were tormenting him. Tormenting? No. We were giving him purpose. He felt invisible, insignificant. We showed him that his life could have meaning, even in its end. He would be remembered. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This person, this Spectre, was completely delusional, twisting their cruel actions into some kind of twisted altruism. I sent David a message, I confessed, my heart sinking with dread. I told him everything. Another long pause. Then, Spectre's reply appeared on the screen. That was a mistake, Alex. A big mistake. My blood ran cold. Was David in danger? Was I in danger? Suddenly, my computer screen went black. The power in my house flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. My heart leaped into my throat. This couldn't be a coincidence. I fumbled for my phone, the dim light of the screen illuminating my panicked face. The battery was almost dead. I tried to turn on a flashlight app, but it wouldn't load. I was completely alone in the dark, the silence of my house amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. Then, I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from downstairs. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound came again, closer this time, like something was dragging itself across the wooden floor. Terror seized me. Was Spectre in my house? How could they have gotten in? I had locked all the doors and windows. I slowly backed away from my desk, my eyes darting around the dimly lit room. The only light came from the sliver of moonlight filtering through my bedroom window. The scratching sound grew louder, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thumping. I had to get out of here. I crept towards my bedroom door, my every muscle tense. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking so violently I could barely grip it. As I turned the knob, I heard a voice, soft and chillingly familiar, whisper from just outside the door. Alex? It's me, David. You said you wanted to talk. My blood turned to ice. David? But his last online message, the way Spectre had talked about him. I slowly opened the door, peering into the darkness of the hallway. And then I saw him. Or rather, I saw a figure standing in the dim light, a figure that vaguely resembled the David I knew from online. But there was something wrong, horribly wrong. His eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and his face was pale and gaunt, as if he had been drained of all life. He held something in his hand, something long and thin that glinted in the moonlight. You tried to help me, Alex, he said, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from beyond the grave. Spectre told me. They told me you understood. That you wanted to join us. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing and hearing. Had Spectre somehow gotten to David before I did? Had they twisted my message, turning my warning into an invitation? David, please, I stammered, taking a step back. You need help. What they told you isn't true. He took a step closer, the glinting object in his hand now clearly visible, a length of thin, taut wire. We were so close, Alex, he whispered, his eyes fixated on me. So close to finding peace. But you tried to interfere. Spectre said you couldn't be trusted. He lunged at me, the wire flashing in the dim light. I screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over a rug and falling to the floor. He was on me in an instant, the wire tightening around my throat. I clawed at his hands, gasping for breath, but his grip was like steel. His eyes, those unnatural glowing eyes, stared down at me, filled with a terrifying mix of sadness and determination. "Don't worry, Alex," he whispered, his voice barely audible above my strangled gasps. "Soon, you'll understand. Soon, we'll all be free." The pressure on my throat intensified. My vision began to blur. I could hear a faint, distorted voice echoing in my ears, a voice that sounded strangely like my own, whispering in unison with David's, "Project Chimera is complete." Then, everything went black. I never thought our conversations on the encrypted channels were being recorded. What I just found is chilling. Wait, that's what I wrote in my initial message to you. This can't be happening. The story, I'm starting to hear scratching sounds outside my door. And there's a message on my screen from someone called Spectre.